Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and, well, we sort of need to talk. Remember all those Demonology PTR videos and such that I released talking about how strong the spec is on PTR and how we might be getting nerfed a bit? Well, yeah, we got nerfed, and the worst part is that it's all through undocumented changes that I found on stream right after the latest PTR build went up. Now, the actual spec itself was not really nerfed per se. All of the nerfs or changes, if you will, revolve around the Vision of Perfection essence and our Demonic Tyrant. I'm going to talk about each of these changes individually, then go over how I feel the spec is as a whole afterwards, towards the end of the video, so let's get right into it. First off, the biggest change that we received is that Vision-based Tyrants are no longer granting the full 3600 or so intellect buff that they were granting before from Supreme Commander at 3 stacks. Instead, they are now granting 35% of the baseline intellect that each Supreme Commander trait grants you, which varies a bit based off of actual Azerite eye level, which directly coincides with the 35% cooldown duration proc that Vision of Perfection grants you. For example, Supreme Commander at 1 stack at 420 eye level grants us 1108 intellect. Previously, this meant that we had about 3300 intellect or so for a full 15 seconds whenever we cast our player-bound Tyrant or proc the Vision-based Tyrant. If you were able to proc a Vision-based Tyrant right before casting your player-bound one, this led to your player-bound Tyrant dealing an insane amount of extra damage as well as buffing you as a whole. The fact that this 3500 intellect buff was refreshed every time you procced a Vision-based Tyrant was even more overpowered. Now whenever you proc a Vision-based Tyrant, you're granted 387 intellect per Supreme Commander trait, down from 1108, which is exactly 35% of the 420 eye level's baseline intellect. 2 Supreme Commander traits grant 775 intellect, and 3 grant the full 1161 or so intellect. There was also a slight change made where now, right when your Vision-based Tyrant expires, you are instantly granted the Supreme Commander buff, instead of it being delayed 7 or so seconds like previous PTR builds. It does make setting up a large player-based Tyrant a bit more inconvenient in a sense, as the sequencing of hand, Demon Bolt, hand, Demon Bolt, hand, hand, is a longer cast chain than the duration of the Vision-based Tyrants, but you will still carry over a good portion of the nerf Supreme Commander buff into your main Tyrant regardless. Just to clarify, your player-bound Tyrant is still granting the full Supreme Commander intellect buff. It was just the Vision-based Tyrants that were changed in this most recent PTR build. It's also worth noting that the full 3500 intellect player-bound Tyrant Supreme Commander buff does stack with a Vision-based Tyrant proc of 1100 intellect, but multiple Vision-based Supreme Commander buffs do not stack. They simply refresh the duration of the 1100 intellect buff back to the full 15 seconds. To be honest with you, I really can't remember if the player-bound and Vision-bound Tyrant Supreme Commander stacking is a change from previous builds or not, but it does improve quality of life, and I mean, come on, who does not love a full 15 seconds of 5000 intellect? Another change that was made and caused me to stop in the middle of my rotation when I initially saw it is that Baleful Invocation now grants only 3 soul shards instead of 5 from Vision-based Tyrant procs only. I want to repeat that this is only for Tyrants procced with Vision of Perfection. Your main player-bound Tyrant still grants the full 5 shards when summoned. While this certainly is a nerf in a sense, the fact that we cannot control when we proc a Vision-based Tyrant means that this is not necessarily as big of a nerf as it seems. There were plenty of times where I would proc a Tyrant at 2 to 4 shards, effectively wasting the other Baleful shards generated, but there is nothing that I could effectively do about it due to the random nature of Vision-based Tyrant procs. Sure, there will be times where you proc a Tyrant off a hand cast or at 1 shard and you will feel the Baleful shard nerf, but once again, it's all RNG based. As far as I can tell, there was no actual nerf to the Demon Fire damage from each Baleful Invocation trait, as my Tyrant was hitting right where he should have been, factoring in and out Baleful pieces during testing. The final change and potential bug that I want to talk about is the fact that the Vision-based Tyrants are no longer factoring in the Demonic Consumption talent. Previously, if you had the Demonic Consumption talent, your Vision-based Tyrants would consume all of your active imps when they procced, just like your player-bound one does when summoned. In the most recent PTR build, however, that is no longer the case. While all these changes are undocumented, I feel like this one would have or should have probably been mentioned somewhere. The good news is that it indeed does extend the duration of all your active demons, including the imps that it previously consumed when it procs, just for a shorter duration. The fact that it does indeed function this way does sort of make me feel like it could also be an intended change, but who really knows at this point. The fact of the matter is that this can both be seen as a nerf and a buff in a sense. At times you would proc vision-based tyrants when you had little to no imps out at all, which either meant that it had very little imps to consume, potentially with very little energy remaining, or none at all, and that tyrant hit like a wet noodle. This change, if intended, does help alleviate some of those issues in a sense, while removing some of the insane damage-based RNG that came with perfect tyrant procs at just the right time. You also have to factor in the potential this brings with now proccing a vision tyrant in the middle of your player-bound tyrant setup. Previously, if this was the case, it made it so that you had to push back your player-bound tyrant, as half the imps you just summoned had been consumed by the vision tyrant. Proccing a tyrant now early in your tyrant setup will freeze those active imps as well as previous imps, at least energy wise, which will then help carry them over at higher energy into your player bound tyrant versus them expiring or going in at lower energy. You will also have a Supreme Commander buff to go along with that tyrant. The chances of this sequencing happening are pretty low, but if it does, your player based tyrant hits like a truck once again. In the end, the most impactful change is certainly the Supreme Commander intellect nerf. In my eyes, it needed to be addressed, and there were really two ways to do it. Either A, nerf the amount of intellect it grants you based off of your number of Supreme Commander traits, or B, keep the large amount of intellect, but nerf the actual uptime that Vision Tyrants grant the player to probably 35% or so on the Supreme Commander buff. The later option would still bring with it a tremendous amount of RNG, as if you proc the Tyrant just at the right time, your damage would still skyrocket like it did in previous PTR builds. Proccing two Tyrants within a few seconds of each other while also in your player-bound Tyrant would be just as OP as before. I suppose having 3 Tyrants active technically is pretty OP regardless, but you pretty much get the picture. Nerfing the amount of intellect it grants is a solid middle ground, I feel, as it's still a very strong buff, and one that you certainly want to see in your Tyrant setup if possible, but it's not worth delaying or fishing for. It also still brings with it the potential to chain multiple Supreme Commander buffs back to back, which is a pretty neat interaction while not being too OP at this point. I've chained Supreme Commander buffs on PTR for as long as almost 2 minutes, so you can see why the intellect buff truly needed to be hit. In the end, just straight up, nerfs suck, but they're a part of the game. I still feel that the Baleful / Supreme build with potentially 1 Meteor piece based off of the Eternal Palace Benthic loot Azerite gear that's available will be really strong, but the nerfs do bring the EP build most likely much closer to it overall now. I think it would be pretty neat to have a Supreme Commander / Baleful Invocation build for single target and raid settings, and then still rock the triple EP build in Mythic Plus, which I feel is where things are probably going anyways. If you were able to get the right procs in your opener or at the right times, Demonology was hands down the best spec on PTR when it came to raw boss damage, while still being a really strong spec even without any procs whatsoever. I do feel that the changes and nerfs are justified, but it does suck seeing them this late into PTR testing. I suppose we're just going to have to wait and see over the next few weeks as to how things shake out with Demonology in 8.2, but I do feel that it's still in a great spot overall heading into 8.2 and the Eternal Palace. Thanks for watching, guys. While it does suck in a sense having to make a video talking about just nerfs, I hope it helped you all get a better grasp on the actual undocumented changes and how Demo now looks post-nerf this late into PTR. After the next PTR build, I hope to also begin releasing my series on essences and talents for each spec as a whole in preparation for 8.2's launch, so be sure to check back if you're interested in that. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you're interested in any weak auras or add-ons you've seen here, there's a link to both my Twitch and Discord in the description where you can find them all. If you want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, smash those like, share, and subscribe buttons as your support really helps. Thanks guys, and I'll see y'all again soon. Peace.